Believe it or not, the 2024 Ohio State stock market is officially closed. I know it's sad for all of us, but guess what? Ohio State got rich, and so did we. Kind of. I don't know. Hopefully you made a lot of money and enjoyed the national championship, which was a week and a half ago now. Time flies. That's Bill Landis and Jeremy Birmingham. I am Austin Ward. This is the Podcast Daily. It's Wednesday. It's time to start buying stocks for 2025. And here are the rules for this, Bill. We're just going to look at the 4 postseason games. So these guys need to be coming back. Was there anything that happened in the college football playoff? Small sample size, but also not that small because 4 games is a third of a regular season.
Mm-hmm.
Who stood out to you during those 4 playoff triumphs for the Buckeyes as you start to look ahead to the 2025 roster?
Caleb Downs. Next question.
Oh, wow. Okay. Great one. Okay.
No. I mean, he did, obviously. But a couple guys, I was actually poking through some of the PFF numbers before we started recording. Do you know who the most targeted defensive player in the playoff was?
Jordan Hancock.
Berm, do you have a guess?
I mean, I would guess Davis and Igbinosun if we're talking about players that are returning to the program. And judging by the number of penalties he got, I assume people view him as a liability, so they throw at him.
It was Sonny Styles.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Which, like, 24 targets was the most. And, like, I don't know. How accurate is that? I don't know. But
running backs and tight ends and crossing patterns. And
the two most targeted players in the playoff were linebackers. It was Sonny Styles with 24 and Anthony Hill at Texas with 20. And I thought, there's Sonny very clearly got beat on that touchdown against Texas. And I think there might have been a play against, was it Oregon, where he kind of got caught in between on whether or not he should rush the quarterback and the kind of ball was kind of thrown over his head. But to be tested that many times, and at least in my opinion, like not appear to be a total liability coverage wise over and over and over and over again, I think says something about the growth that Sonny made throughout this season at the linebacker position. And I thought he was very good against the run. I thought overall at the championship game was one of the better games maybe I saw Sonny play from start to finish. And it was clear to me throughout the season that he was getting more and more comfortable at that position. We've talked about that a time or two, but the playoff felt just sort of like another step in that, and perhaps even a bit like propulsive for him into next year, where I don't know if he's going to be a will linebacker 100% of the time or not next year. I guess we need to figure out who's coordinating the defense before we figure out what it's going to look like. But I think there's opportunity there for Sonny to tap into his versatility, perhaps even more next season. And the fact that he was challenged so much in coverage this year was quite good against the run, in my opinion. I think bodes well for moving him around a little bit more in 2025. So I'll buy some stock in further development and perhaps even rising to the level of but like a star linebacker kind of opportunity for Sonny Styles next year, based off what I saw in the 4 games.
I think there's a goal. One of the reasons that Sonny is coming back to Ohio State is because I think that there's a belief that he can be the number 1 taken linebacker in the NFL draft next year. And I think that there's actually an opportunity, depending on what happens with the defensive coordination and maybe, if there's any changes anywhere else on the defense, like I think you could see Sonny being utilized in like an edge role as well in the future, because I think that's, we've seen the versatility of him to be able to go into the secondary and move up to linebacker, but I think he's such a unique athlete that he can do all 3 levels of the defense. And I think that there's a chance that happens next year. But I'm going to pick Jeremiah Smith, obviously.
Oh, gosh, you guys are so good at this.
No.
Caleb Downs and Jeremiah Smith. That's smart.
No, we're not allowed to pick him either.
I guess I needed to make more rules.
Look at us.
I'm going to stick on defense, if you guys don't mind, and really piss Austin off, because I'm going to say Germaine Mathews, who I think, the second half of the Texas game, he was out there exclusively opposite Davis and Igbinosun when Denzel Burke had a little issue, and Jermaine's ability has never really been in doubt. He is so confident. He is a kid that has a very short memory. He does all the things you want out of a corner. But what I love about him is just how physical he is. And I think that when you lose a guy like Denzel Burke, who this year, I don't know that he got what he wanted out of this year as far as his NFL draft projections, but we saw a much more physical run stopping type of corner out of Denzel Burke that I don't think anyone anticipated seeing. And I think that that's something that Germaine excels in as well. And if the Buckeyes are going to find a way to rotate Jermaine and Davison and Aaron Scott and Devin Sanchez, et cetera, in the future, I think you're going to see a Germaine Matthews to play super free, super fast, and super physical. And I think it's funny. You look at the Ohio State roster, and they're only returning, I think, something like 8 starters projected for next year. But they return a lot of dudes that played a lot of football, and Germaine Mathews is one of them. And so I think that, to veer off here, I think that does lend some credibility to the idea that maybe the right decision with the defensive coordinator is to promote from within and figure something out, because it's not like you're starting from scratch with this defense, despite the fact that you're losing a lot of starters. You have a lot of guys that understand the current system and understand the current expectations in that system. And I think it makes a lot of sense for the Buckeyes to stay on that path.
Why would you think that I'd be upset about any conversation about Jermaine Mathews?
Because you were going to take him, obviously.
I wrote down 3 names, and I actually did not write down Jermaine because I just thought he was too obvious. And also, I own all of his stock already.
So you were going to – okay, so the next one is Luke Montgomery. Go ahead.
No, I actually took like smaller sample sizes. I wanted to go find like guys who contributed in a meaningful way that like were probably under the radar through the playoff. And I found 3 that I thought were really intriguing. And
wow, Jaden Felding. Nice.
Nope, not Jaden Felding either, but
okay,
you can add him in there. So the first one that I wrote down, and I was going through all the box scores from those 4 games, and it felt to me, I was actually surprised because I thought that Kenyan Jackson was going to have more raw numbers than he did, because when Ohio State was working through tempo situations and subbing, it felt like Kenyatta was involved at a much greater clip than in the postseason compared to the regular season, and that was probably true. But I also thought that he was showing up around the football a lot more than the box score showed. But he made some contribution in all 4 games, whether that was a tackle, whether that was a pass breakup, whether that was a tackle for loss, which he added in the national championship game. He was showing up a lot. Now, not to the level of Jack Sawyer, not to the level of JT Tuimoloau, but I think we've all been waiting for the next step in Kenyan Jackson's development, and he was blocked off from the field a lot by those 2 returning seniors. But he was still involved, pretty significantly, at least in the rotation, if not statistically. I think that bodes very well. I would have been stunned at this time a year ago or even 2 years ago if you were going to say Kenyan Jackson is going to be returning for a 4th season at Ohio State. But that is a very big deal. And I think the way that he was involved in the postseason is going to give him a little bit of a springboard. Maybe it gives him some more confidence both in the plan for how he'll be used or the opportunity now that Jack and JT are gone. Some combination of all of those things. He's another person, like you mentioned, Berm, that maybe year 3 and the number of snaps, the number of opportunities were not what he would have envisioned. Similar to someone else who I might talk about at wide receiver later on, but they did their part for the team, and I think it sets them up for a really big senior season when they can capitalize. And there's going to be a ton of NFL draft talk and projections about what Kenyatta can become with 1 more year, and I think that the playoff paved a little bit of the way for that.
He was on my list. That's a good pick. I thought there was
you had a list. Did you get told what we were doing on the show beforehand?
Somebody didn't watch Tuesday's date.
Yeah.
Wow.
I had a short list and Kenyan Jackson was on it. I think he showed like a more complete game maybe over the course of the playoffs than I was anticipating. And he also was very clearly their 3rd defensive end too. If you look at snap counts, like Mitchell Melton and Caden Curry like played about the same amount of snaps, but Kenyan Jackson played like 30 something more than both those guys over the course of those 4 games too. So yeah, he didn't like fill up the stat sheet quite like I thought he did. And even pressures wise, I think he only had 4 and 3 of them were in the Rose Bowl, but I just kind of felt like you noticed him out there more in a way that felt very promising.
Yeah, I thought I would see more raw numbers, which I don't know if that means that I just don't know what I'm looking at, or if the few plays that he did made stuck out in my mind. Maybe it could be both of those things, that I'm gullible and easily influenced. But I just think that the ceiling is incredibly high for him. And to your point, Bill, the thing that we've always known and seen in practices and spring camp, whatever, that he can rush the passer. But I think it's one of those, like, can you be the all-around guy? You knew that Jack and JT would be really stout against the run on the edge and handle their responsibilities. And I think maybe we started seeing some of that from Kenyatta in the postseason, which again is going to be critical because he and Caden Curry are going to have to go be the prominent guys on the edge next year.
They sure are. Berm, did you have time to make a list in the time we were talking about Kenyan Jackson?
Yeah, I just made a whole list. Wrote it down.
Cool. I hope Brandon Ennis wasn't on it because he's my second pick.
He was, but I wasn't going to pick
Oh, we all wrote down Brandon Ennis. Let's be honest.
Yeah. He only had 2 targets in the entire playoff, but they were pretty memorable. The route that he ran against Notre Dame on that was a third down completion. Is that what it was?
Yeah.
Nasty. Just a nasty route by that man. I am a little, I guess, unclear exactly on like what the slot position might look like next year with the addition of Max Clair, because he is, in my opinion, more of just like a big slot receiver than an all the time inline tight end. So that doesn't mean that Brandon Ennis won't get the ball, because he's going to play a lot more with Emeka Egbuka gone, and there are a lot of targets there that are now up for grabs with Emeka moving on. I've been very impressed by Ennis all year because his work has been so sporadic, but they've also called upon him in some pretty crucial moments, and he just seems to be ready. And I guess that speaks to his maturity and work ethic and mindset, which is great for a sophomore to have, and at the capacity that he appears to have it. But there's real skill there too. I think some of the way we've discussed him is like, oh, he's a really important leader. He's an emotional force for this offense. Like, all that is true, but it's also like he's a dude. And I think we've hardly begun to really even see any of that out of him yet, just because of what he's had the weight behind. But we saw, even on just like 2 targets and even a couple of the blocks I thought he threw in the postseason, glimpses of it that at least got me really excited about what he's going to be moving forward now that the opportunity is there for him.
I was going to say that was like a full month ago in the Rose Bowl, that block on Travion Henderson's touchdown run. It's like, it doesn't show up in the stat sheet, but it's another thing that you added to the column that he provides that we maybe don't talk about enough, even though I know you and I both talked about that block a lot in the immediate aftermath of that win over Oregon.
Mm-hmm.
And Brandon is a dude, but like the leadership piece, the other side of what he brings is also so valuable that it's like we talk about that, because especially for a team that, again, is only going to have 7 or 8 projected returning starters, like you have to have guys like that who are the heartbeat of the team. And that's what Brandon is. And but yeah, that dude is, once he gets the ball in his hands, is going to be a problem for people around college football also. If we were having this conversation a week ago, I would probably have mentioned the name Hero Kanu and said that I think that he's in a position to make himself into a very important part of the interior defensive line rotation next year. But now he's not on the team anymore, as he entered the transfer portal, and he'll end up probably at Florida or Texas. But so that, to me, only further exacerbates the importance of what Caden McDonald and Edric Houston are going to be next year. So I'm just going to pick them both, because you're looking at a team that, with the departures of Tyleik Williams and Ty Hamilton and Hero Kanu, and I'm not even sure like if Tywan Malone has another year returning or not. I don't really know the entire roster makeup right now. I believe he does.
He does,
but then still,
eligibility is just a figment of your imagination.
That's true. The unproven nature of Jason Moore and Will Smith, and then you've got new guys coming in like Jarquez Carter, et cetera. That position went from really pretty deep to one that is now like, oh, we have 2 guys that have played, and those 2 guys are going to have to play a ton of snaps next year, in Caden McDonald and Edric Houston. And I don't know what the defensive alignment's going to be. We've obviously talked at length over the last few months about the potential for more 3-down lineman situations for Ohio State, but whether it's 3-down lineman, I think Edric still is a guy that kicks outside in that setting, or if it's a 4-down front, Edric is going to have to be a very important part of the 3-tech. And it's weird because we've seen Ty and Ty in there for so long. It feels like they've been at Ohio State for a decade each. So like, it's the first time we really are seeing a changeover at that position. And boy, oh boy, like if you want to establish yourselves as a title contender early in next season, it's going to take those 2 playing really, really big minutes and a lot of great football. And we saw glimpses of it, especially with Edric Houston in the playoffs, where his energy and the way that he gets after the quarterback, I think, really shines through. And I think he's only going to build on that. And then Caden McDonald, we saw all we needed to see out of him in one of the first, on the November 2nd playoff game against Penn State, where he gets put into the situations to make stops at the goal line and does it. So kind of huge to think about replacing TNT, but now we need some explosives. out of Caden and Edric.
Can you do that? Can you take two players at once on a stock watch? I don't think
I can do whatever I want. I also said we because Homer Berm is here on a Wednesday.
Oh boy. HB is just in full force here. What a guy. I think you guys brought up Max Clair already. I was going to talk about the tight end position with Will Casmir because I thought it was only 3 catches. So it's not a huge amount. Again, I went for some smaller sample size and smaller contributions, but I do think getting him back to full strength and healthy during this playoff run was critical for Ohio State, not just in the passing attack, because, as we get into offseason conversation, it's like, well, how many times are you going to throw it to the tight end? Not that many. Okay, great. Move on to the next thing. They did it some. They did it with both Will Casmir. They did it with G. Scott. They're not going to have G. Scott. We'll see exactly what that means with Clair coming in from Purdue. But I think that was a really key component of the offense overall, especially for the number of times we've talked about Ohio State wanting to be in 12 personnel and use 2 tight ends. When he suffered that injury against Oregon, I think that did throw a wrinkle at them that was difficult for them to overcome. And we saw a more fully formed and functional version of the Ohio State offense in the postseason, in the playoff run. I'm not saying that you can chalk that up solely to Will Casmir because Jeremiah Smith is still a person who exists on this team, and he was the one who actually truly elevated the ceiling for this team. But in terms of like play in, play out, and toughness and running the football, I think getting Casmir back was critical for what Ohio State wanted to do, and he did contribute some to the passing attack. Does that mean he's going to have 40 or 50 catches returning for one more year? I would bet not, but I do think that having him back for one more year and pairing him with another veteran tight end who's got proven productivity in the Big Ten is going to be a pretty big deal for this team.
Do you know, speaking of tight ends, who Ohio State's best run blocker, at least according to PFF, was in the postseason?
Bennett Christian?
It was Bennett Christian. And and on a decent work sample too. Almost 50 run blocking snaps.
I just love when there are players on a roster who aren't afraid to just accept their role and do it as well as they can. And I think Ohio State is really, really great at rewarding those players by giving them a bigger role. And what you've seen out of Will and Bennett in the last month certainly gives you some optimism for the future. Max Clair is such a different animal than those guys. And it will be fascinating to see how Keenan Bailey, who we don't talk about it a lot because it's tight end in Ohio State, and Ohio State doesn't use the tight end, blah, blah, blah. I think outside of maybe Georgia, Ohio State's tight end room might be the deepest and most talented in America, which is crazy considering they throw to the tight end like once every 3 games. But they are really good. And heading into the spring with Jelani Thurman still there, which I think is a surprise to some, you have an opportunity for Keenan Bailey to make that room the centerpiece of the offense. And then when you have a new quarterback taking over, and yes, I know you have Jeremiah Smith and Cardinal Tate and Brandon Ennis, but you need that security blanket. And whoever the quarterback is for Ohio State in the spring is going to have some really good, safe options at tight end and guys who are really very different. But man, that room is loaded.
You got me excited for March, which is the time of the year where you just you see some of these practices and all they do is throw to the tight ends, and they can do that. These are good ones. So I can't wait for 6 weeks from now on a stock watch to be like, you know what? Ohio State's tight ends are going to have 100 catches this year. Book it.
They are. I bet we hear from Ryan Day at some point in the offseason that this is the best tight end room he's had.
I don't think there's any doubt about that being the case, though. I mean,
Claire
elevates it. Claire elevates it in a way that Ohio State just hasn't had. If you go back, and honestly, let's think back to 2023. Cade Stover was a finalist for the Mackey Award, and there were 3 separate games in that season where he didn't have a target. That is insane to even consider. So for Max Clair to take the risk that he's taking to say, hey, I want to change the Ohio State offense and give them an option they haven't had since Ricky Dudley in 1995, that it changes things a lot, I think, especially for a young quarterback.
I'm really excited to hear from Max Clair for the first time. And because this, to me, Berm, it felt like it came out of the sky. There was no, you must get a tight end and it's got to be this one, go get the best one available on the market. It was like Max Clair picked up the phone and called Keenan Bay, was like, do you need a tight end? And Keenan was like, yeah. And he's like, all right, cool. I'm in. I don't know how this happened, but it's a huge thing for Ohio State.
It's a beautiful thing when kids who are from Ohio get an opportunity to go out and prove that they are Ohio State caliber and get a chance to come home. And Max Clair, was not an Ohio State caliber receiver / tight end / prospect when he came out of high school. And now he gets to a college level, puts on some good weight, and shows people, hey, I can do different things. And again, I think that it's a conversation that only happens at Ohio State because the true pass catchers in the room, the guys like Max LeBlanc and even Jelani, I don't think are ready to take that step. And so what you get is an opportunity that you can't pass up. And Ohio State was certainly not in the market for a tight end, but when Max Clair becomes available, you have no choice but to say yes.
Yeah. Bill,
and that's not even talking about Brody Lennon and Nate Roberts, who are coming in, who might be the two best or the best tandem in the country in the class of 2025. So it's as deep a room as I can ever remember at tight end at Ohio State.
Sure. But they're also freshmen at tight ends. And the thing about playing tight end is that on one snap, you have to be able to block a defensive end. And on the next one, you have to be able to win a route against a safety.
Yeah, I've never heard that before. That's an interesting insight.
Yeah, I know it's a new wrinkle that I've just considered about that position. Bill, have we reached the Luke Montgomery portion of the stock watch, or you have something else in mind?
We have. I was going to ask if he's too obvious, because I think you could say good things about all those guys on the interior of the offensive line who are coming back for next year, but I don't know how you could be, I guess, more impressed with anyone than you would be with Luke to get thrown into the way that he was and to perform the way that he did. I not every snap was perfect. I think we've mentioned before. You can get back at that Texas game, especially. There's a snap or two there that I'm sure he'd like back. Maybe against Oregon, Derek Harmon a time or two might have gotten him. I'm not saying he's like a finished product, but I thought he could have been out there with his head spinning and just not able to make the right reads, make the right calls, anchor the way he needed to anchor against some of these pretty big and athletic defensive tackles that Ohio State had to play. And I just thought he performed really admirably. And it was nice too, I think, to get a little clarity, I guess, on what exactly Luke is and is going to be for this team, right? We spent the first year and a half, almost 2 years of his career wondering, like, is he a tackle? Is he a guard? We saw him at center, and I guess he could still be a center. But I thought he looked pretty comfortable at guard. I thought his athleticism was a plus for Ohio State at that position. He does seem to have the necessary strength, which was a big question of mine when they put him in there. So there's a lot there to work with and mold now that he has 4 games under his belt against this kind of competition, and the confidence I think that would come with that going into this offseason. I'm not entirely sure, I guess, what, like, you could have a pretty ramped up, like charged up offseason with the interior offensive line if you wanted to, with like all the guys that could roll through there, all the competition you could try to manufacture. But I also understand, like, guys need rest. So I don't know what to expect from spring ball necessarily. But for I guess I would assume right now that, like, the situation will be the same come camp, and boy, is that going to be pretty fun to watch all those guys go through that. But I don't know that I was necessarily looking at Luke as someone who was going to be like all the way in the mix to start in 2025 until we saw what we saw from him in this playoff run. And now, you might have a chance to be their best interior offensive lineman next year. And that's a heck of a jump for him to make. So I know I'm not the only one who was impressed with him, but I think he was definitely the guy that helped himself the most up front in the postseason.
You used the right word there. It's confidence. Just if you see Luke and talk to Luke in the last month versus talking to him in September, it's like two different people. Mm-hmm. And honestly, like, getting beat occasionally by Derek Harmon or an interior lineman at Texas, like, that's going to happen to the best guard in the country, no matter what. That you're talking about top 40, top 50 NFL draft picks. So I was going to pick Tegra Shabola because I think that for a kid that had a fairly sizable midseason dip, the way that he picked it back up in the playoffs was exceptionally admirable. And again, I've talked at length about Tegra and his confidence and how difficult it is for him sometimes to be the alpha male that, like, you almost have to be at Ohio State because he's not that type of type A personality all the time. But he really picked it up in the playoffs because Austin Sareveld was battling injury and not able to really rotate the way that we thought they were all going to rotate when the playoffs started. So I think they all deserve a ton of credit for that. And I think a lot of that credit, as we've talked about already in the last week, goes to Justin Fry. But final player for me would have to be it's going to be weird because I know that he didn't really play much in the playoff. I actually have 2 guys that I want to talk about. That
you just said Tegra, and now you're naming 2 more guys?
Yeah, because, dude, Ohio State just won the national championship. Didn't you hear? There's good things happening.
We have a long off season to go. We can do more stock watch.
Nothing is longer than Wednesday on the podcast daily. And okay, so tell me, do you want offense or defense? And I'll just pick the one on each side. I'll just pick the one guy that you guys say on the count of three. Say offense or defense. 1, 2, 3.
Offense.
Okay. See, I was hoping you'd say defense because
did you flip a poker chip?
I did.
I don't really want to give this one away because he didn't play in the playoffs, but we saw him over and over in the playoffs when we were inside of the Woody Hayes Athletic Center.
Do you want to do it on a different show, Berm?
I'm just telling you, the Mylan Graham experience.
I was going to say that.
When it begins is going to be something special.
I should have said defense. Stupid poker chip.
When the Mylan Graham experience begins on offense in earnest this spring, it's going to be special. And people are going to be like, oh my God, that guy was sitting behind these other players and didn't even play last year. Like, watch out. It's not hype. Watch out.
Well, there's going to be hype.
Yeah.
But sometimes you live up to it. He's going to.
Some dudes do that.
Well, we'll leave. Maybe we should have left Mylan for just another day. We'll leave your defense as a cliffhanger because we've covered plenty of ground here on a Wednesday stock watch to wrap up 2024 and the college football playoff run. And there is a lot of offseason to go, but we'll have some 3 thoughts on a Thursday for me and Berm. We'll wrap things up. Maybe, what do you guys think? A little notebook on Freaky Friday? See what people want to hear about from the end of the year?
You mean a mailbag?
What did I say? Notebook? Is that different?
You want to walk the streets of Columbus with a microphone? I'm
going to walk around in my house.
Do you want to go to the Short North and just do man on the street interviews about how people are feeling?
My brain is still fried. I'm sorry. A mailbag. Does that sound better rather than just me wandering around the streets of Columbus by myself?
The first postseason mailbag. It sounds like a wonderful idea. So we'll ask for questions for that on Thursday.
Yes. Okay. We will. Sorry for that. Just a slip. I guess I did too many notebooks during the playoff as well. Stock up on the notebook. I had a lot of fun doing that. And stock up to all of you who have watched us on the podcast daily all year round. For Bill Landis and Jeremy Birmingham, I am Austin Ward. This has been Wednesday on the podcast daily. We'll talk to you tomorrow.